Good evening. Welcome to Brutal Peace Theatre. Tonight, we'll begin a new series called The Worst Honda Shadows Ever Made, or something similar to that. I'm not sure what we're going to put in the titles. That's their decision over there, right? Jolly good, jolly good. This episode was written by Sir Dr. Dickhead, who is me, for TJ Brutal Customs, by Sir Dr. Dickhead. Copyright and patents are held by TJ Brutal Customs, and all parties hereof shall be exempt from accusations of ballyhoo and sneak thievery, and any infractions shall be met with swift and violent judgment by a sunburnt man riding a shopping cart wearing a fez, wielding an ice pet and a Tupperware lid. Let's begin. Our tale begins in the 80s. Early 80s were a strange time for the motorcycle world. Sales were bad across the board, everyone was doing cocaine. With little help from said cocaine investors, Harley had just reclaimed ownership of its name and company from AMF, and metric imports were flying off the shelves. Until they weren't. Honda has widely been able to repurpose many of its innovations to other platforms, even if initial ideas weren't absolute rock stars off the bat. The Japanese universal motorcycle of the time was the inline powerhouses of the CB line, and they were absolutely crushing sales. So begins our tale into the early years of Honda joining the V-twin market.
The Honda Ascot, what motorcycling was meant to be.
Tonight, we will begin this segment with the VT500. The 80s were a very curious time for Honda, making all kinds of weird stuff. Now, they dropped the CX500, an FT500, and the super complex and over-engineered, in my opinion, VF500. Clearly, I haven't had enough to drink. Excuse me. This is for my throat. Oh, delish Navidad. Now, the motorcycle market had a bit of a collapse in '83, and this ill-fated design was born at the wrong fucking time. Now, the VT500 was released in America in two versions, the VT500 Ascot and the VT500 Shadow. They never did quite well in sales and can often be found in like-new condition. You usually find these bikes going for anywhere between free to $1,500. In '83, sales were bad enough to end production in '84. Honda had to drop prices below dealer cost just to move old inventory out, and now and then you can even find a random VT500 crate condition unused. Now, the VT500 was sold between 1982 and 1984 and had a few variants, like the Ascot, the FT500, VT500C Shadow, which was actually offered in many other countries up to 1988. Now, the VT500 was actually the base engine for later models, such as the NT, the VRX, and the NTV engines. This engine actually did pretty well when Honda released the 650cc Hawk GT. So the engine design was an absolutely total loss. It was just not suited for the VT500 cruiser platform. In '83, they saw the writing on the wall and ceased production in the end of '83. '84 was primarily just moving any units they had produced to get them off the sales floor. Now, the engine of this bike, it's not a true 500cc, it's actually 491 cc's. It's a liquid-cooled inline V-twin, 52 degrees, 3 valves per cylinder. And its compression ratio of 10.5 to 1, claimed 50 horsepower at 9,000 RPMs, offset crank pins, 6-speed gearbox, final drive was shaft. Frame was a steel tube double cradle. Suspension was telescopic front forks, twin shocks in the rear. Brakes were twin 11-inch discs in the front. No idea why you need 2 discs to stop a 500cc bike, but it also had the timeless Honda drum rear brake.
It's going well, don't you think?
No, I'm sorry, it's going terribly well, sir. Just smashing, smashing. Back to it, shall we, old chap? Cheerio. The tires were 190/18 front, 120/80/18 in the rear. The seat height was only 31 inches, not the shortest, but attainable for many riders. The wheelbase was 58 inches, weighed about 416 pounds, and it was just stylistically kind of weird. Bear in mind, Honda had really crushed the market when it came to their inline twins, their inline 4s, and inline 6s. That old CBX 900. They had destroyed the market. Absolutely sold so many units that Harley was having a problem. We'll cover that in the next section. But moving along, we're going to cover some pros and cons of the 500, and I'd love to hear your feedback as to what you think is a pro and a con for this bike. And now, a word from our sponsors.
Oh yeah, brother! Raise hell, praise Dale! ShopTJBC.com. Get your motorcycle parts today! Woo!
Now, my pros are, they were cheap. They were an inexpensive bike to buy at the time. They cost anywhere between $1,500 to $2,000, depending on where you bought them. I think $35 was one of their list prices when when they first came out, but Honda quickly realized that due to the market, they had to drop the prices. As mentioned previously, the prices had to drop below dealer cost just to move these off the floor. Now, another pro, they're liquid-cooled. As we know, a liquid-cooled engine will last far longer than an air or oil-cooled engine. Now, this is a pro, in my opinion, Comstar wheels. I think they're bitchin' looking. Some people don't like them. I think they're very telling of the period and reminiscent of the 80s. They're cheap, so you find one, it's not a big deal if you fuck it up. Another little pro, it's kind of a little piece of history. The compact design on the VT500 made it nimble and maneuverable. Now on to the cons. They had quite a cramped riding position. Honda really hadn't dialed in the ergonomics of riding a cruiser at this point in time. As we know, if you really don't have the ergonomics dialed in, people are going to ride it, they're going to give reviews and say, wow, I'd rather sit for 3 hours on a cactus, which is pretty much the reviews that came out at the time. No one was happy with the ergonomics, the hand placement was odd, the foot placement was odd, the seat and the P-pad were just kind of weirdly placed, and it really didn't make for a comfortable long-term ride. Additionally, they didn't have a high fuel capacity either, so you could go about 80 to 90 miles depending on how you rode that throttle. Another con is going to be the shaft drive, which does tend to rob power from a nice engine. Granted, it does provide for a virtually maintenance-free rear end and final drive. However, you do lose a bit of power, so already being a 500cc engine, you didn't have a whole lot of blood and guts to get you down the road. The shaft made it even a little worse, gave the bike the shaft, if you will. You have to remove one of the down tubes to remove the engine. This is a common design to 80s Hondas, and it actually carried over to the 1100 line and a few other bikes as well. Another con, Comstar wheels. Some people love them, some people hate them, that's why I put it in the pros and the cons. Another con here is these bikes were not meant for bigger riders. A 200-pound dude would pretty much overwhelm the suspension. You hit the brakes, you've got maybe an inch of travel. Parts are nearly impossible to find for these bikes. If you go on to any website online, you may find some of the more common parts that are shared with other models to be something you can actually obtain. It is rare. There are some parts houses who purchase new old stock and sell those parts online. However, you're going to have a really hard time finding the bodywork and the rubber parts. Those are the most difficult parts to find out there. Another con, the trim is very fragile. Everything on that bike that was plastic, any trim coverings, is like a 90-year-old woman's hips. So you look at it the wrong way and it's a quick trip to the hospital. If you can find one of these bikes in reasonable condition, be very careful when you remove the tins, any of the bodywork, because the attachment points were not secure. The material, plastic as we know, does not last forever unless it's microplastics in your testicles. That shit's never going away. But just be careful around these old gals. Last but not least, the cluster looks like it's from Top Gun. This could be also a pro, however, I felt it was more of a con since every example I've ever seen in the wild has been faded, pretty gross. Now I know there's some motherfucker out there who's like, total gig is pulling off old clusters and restoring them to their former glory. I don't rule that out. Now, one of the reasons that the 500 is one of the worst bikes that Honda ever made is because it was made for such a short period of time and Honda ceased providing replacement parts support. I believe by the late 80s, most Honda shops had ceased carrying any parts for it and were turning away customers for warranty work. In summation, the VT500 is a motorcycle that's probably one of the worst Honda Shadows ever made. I'm not here to shit on every model of Honda Shadow that's no longer in existence, but I do want to warn anyone out there who is interested in purchasing a VT500. You may see it for a song on your local Facebook Marketplace, the OfferUp, or your Grindr account possibly, and you think, wow, that's a steal, I'd love to hop on that. Now, bear in mind, if you get it and it's not running, you may have a task set out for yourself. If you are looking for a challenge, it's probably the bike for you. Now, the pros of the VT500. They're cheap, they're liquid-cooled, Comstar wheels. Not a big deal if you fuck it up because it's cheap. They're a little piece of history. Compact design makes them nimble and maneuverable. And then our cons. Cramped riding position. Nobody likes to sit in the fetal position for too long. Shaft drive. You have to remove one of the down tubes to remove the engine. Comstar wheels. That's straddling the fence, I know. Not meant for bigger riders. Parts are nearly impossible to find. Bodywork and rubber parts are all but obsolete. In fact, mostly obsolete. The tank is small. You have maybe an 80 to 90 mile range. Trim is very fragile. The cluster looks like it's from Top Gun. Mind if I pilot? Sure, as long as you crash and burn. Where? Into my ass. How's it going? Hope you enjoyed this video. You ever bought yourself a VT500 and several months later asked yourself, the fuck have I gotten into? go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button. If you have any questions, have any suggestions for videos we could do in the future, go ahead and leave us a comment down below. And please, bear in mind, I can't fucking diagnose the sounds on your motorcycle by YouTube comments. Promise, I could do my best, we'd be there for fucking 100 years. All right, guys? Do fun shit. Sweet, is that a wrap? Awesome, awesome. I gotta piss. Oh, did we get the second outro?
Yeah, we got everything.
You sure? Okay. Cheers, man. Thank you.